welcome to episode 17 of the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce. I'm your co-host, Isaiah Bollinger from Trellis, and I'm here with Tim.
Hey everybody, I'm Timothy Peterson. I'm a client advocate for Trellis, and let me tell you a little bit about our sponsor, Punchout2Go. They are a global B2B integration company specializing in connecting commerce business platforms with e-procurement and ERP applications. And Punchout2Go's iPaaS technology seamlessly links business applications to automate the flow of purchasing data. With their solution, you can immediately reduce integration complexities for Punchout catalogs, electronic purchase orders, e-invoices, and other B2B sales order automation documents in order to accelerate business results. So thank you to Punchout2Go. And welcome to all of our listeners once again to the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce.
Yeah, this is an exciting episode. It's we have our guest, Ben Rudnick, from Fun Hat. Well, you do many things, but I think Fun Hat is kind of your baby. So, and I'm glad you got the hat here today. So, I actually met Ben a few years ago when I was, I was midway through my B2B e-commerce journey, and we've evolved together a little bit. So, you've been in everything from distribution, manufacturing, technology, kind of all over the place. So, tell everyone a little bit more about that in detail, because there's so much to talk about with you and what you've done. So,
well, I was born in a geodesic dome to a hippie doctor in the mountains who wrote his own software for managing a doctor's office in the 70s. So
that says it all. That really says it all.
That gives the beginning of the setting. So I had my own business doing basically software consulting and implementations for business software as an adolescent. I had a full-time gig working in QA for the MathWorks, the makers of MATLAB and Simulink, scientist and engineer technical software. Full-time gig there while I was in college getting a degree in biomedical engineering. So I've had parallel paths in commerce and data mining and as well as healthcare technology. And also I have an entertainment business career too. So I keep myself busy. I rehab old beautiful houses. This place was in need of some help, but made out of 150-year-old beams, but with beautiful contemporary design on the side of a mountain. So I don't really know how to sleep, but I like to keep myself focused while I'm also continuing to do e-commerce consulting, as I've been doing for about 20 years. I also am the Chief Products Officer and the Chief Exponential Inspiration Officer for a healthcare technology company worth about $1 billion. And right now with that, I'm really focused on optimizing coronavirus testing using technology, and we converted a small cancer genetics lab to do high throughput, super high accuracy molecular genetic coronavirus testing, right? The PCR, RNA testing that people need for coronavirus. With technology, we're optimizing our throughput. And, last week we did 1,500 tests for one school district and 6,000 tests for an entertainment industry contract. And with my next rollout of technology to optimize the lab, our little tiny lab will be able to do in the neighborhood of 1 to 2 million tests a month. So I'm a big optimization geek, right? So I've been optimizing and measuring e-commerce, right? And studying shopper behavior. That's kind of been my niche is, started off in personalization and then shifted from selling people things that they didn't come here to buy to figuring out how to focus on selling people things that they are trying to look for and having difficulty finding. So I was a pioneer in the area of findability, search, navigation, synchronization, and optimization in that regard. And then maybe that'll be the focus of today's conversation, because it's B2B e-commerce. There's a lot of room there for opportunity.
Yeah. So that's, I think, kind of how we met, because you had worked for a search technology company, Easy Ask. And then I think that's kind of how you got into storefront distribution community, which for people that don't know, it's essentially you could call it a legacy e-commerce platform for this distribution industry that uses the Infor ERP, a specific Infor SX ERP for distribution. So you've done a lot of work with that. So let's start there. I'd love, because we've talked. I think there are a lot of distributors out there, and obviously they're pretty much mostly B2B. Sometimes they have a B2C component, or they might open up and anyone can buy, but ultimately their business is very B2B. And I think there's kind of like, whether they admit it or not, in my opinion, there's a little bit of a silent crisis going on, where like Amazon and everything is moving to this like automated e-commerce stuff, and a lot of these guys are stuck on these legacy technologies. They don't have their product data organized, as you know, that affects search. So what have you seen, because you've been doing this for a long time, and I think things are starting to get to that, what I call the silent crisis moment.
Yeah, well, being that I've been a data modeler specifically since the 90s, tracking trends is just in my nature, right? And so the overall trend of B2B, B2C convergence, or D2C, right? The popular term now is direct to consumer.
Yep.
Because the direct to consumer also encompasses if a manufacturer is going direct to consumer. And that's something else that the B2B community is concerned with. So overall, there's been this grander trend of market convergence, right? And a big part of that is related to the expectation of that retail website experience, right? The shoppers on a B2B site, they really appreciate, and they're coming to expect, that kind of high-class experience that you'd get with retail e-commerce. And most B2B sites don't have that. And so if you're stuck on something legacy and you're in behind, then that can be a challenge. But don't let that really be a challenge for you. Like you mentioned, my role with Easy Ask, and I led their product strategy and a number of other aspects of the business. And early on, we had one client who was stuck with, they had decided that they needed to use us, right? Through references, they actually got connected directly to me with somebody who I had made big moves on their e-commerce site. Because when I come in and give people consulting, it's actually pretty easy for me to move the needle on your revenue 10, 15, or 20% or more. So if you're doing 100 million a year and I come in and give you some consulting and you're making tens of millions extra, you're a real happy client, right? So I get all my business by word of mouth from these people saying, hey, you have that problem? Well, he solved that for me before, right? So somebody had come to us and they had decided that they wanted me to work and the easiest tool to work within their next platform, but they hadn't decided the platform yet. When they came down to the decision of a new platform, they realized, oh, gee, we have to upgrade our ERP also? Well, that's a giant project now, right? So instead, I actually just went in and, I still don't mind picking up the shovel and writing code. So I went in and myself figured out how to hack their old e-commerce platform shopping cart and integrate that into an entirely new skin that just sat on top of the Easy Ask engine. Because the Easy Ask search and navigation engine, if you think about it, clicking through categories and navigating through search, that's a lot of the nuts and bolts of a website.
Yep.
Right? In fact, even if you roll back the clock to like 2006, 2007, the live BassPro.com website was just a modification of the Easy Ask sample software. The software that's the sample application that was shipped with the product was turned into and skinned into the actual Bass Pro website. They just added some extra stuff, but the underlying structure was actually just the sample. So really, it's a big part of the nuts and bolts. But anyway, so the overall trend of convergence, right, that B2B convergence into the B2C expectation, that's the bigger trend, right, that's going on. But the important thing right now for B2B businesses is the immediate challenge. In 2020, the huge challenge is availability. So for my B2B clients, the biggest thing that has had an impact for them is getting availability indications into the filters on their website. So if your site gives you the ability to click and say what's available, right? And, even just in stock and, not in stock, right? Back ordered, low stock, you can get more granular with it, but just in stock or out of stock, right? Or available, ships 2 days. If you don't want to say something's not in stock, there's lots of different ways to word it, right? But giving the shopper that kind of filter so that when they buy something, they know it'll actually get in the box in the next couple of days, right? That's one of the biggest things right now because of the supply chain challenges. That's the trend that's huge right now. Okay, I mean, you can have warehouse availability on the product detail page. That's great, but it doesn't help somebody decide to get to the product detail page, right? So that's the like huge shift in trend that is acute right now in 2020 is product availability.
Gotcha. So yeah, there's so much to talk about, but just to kind of simplify for someone that's maybe not sophisticated in B2B e-commerce as a distributor, and a lot of this can apply to manufacturing too, but you mentioned availability. What would be kind of your advice for them to kind of get going and get moving? And maybe they have some legacy stuff and it's like they need to do something. They can't just kind of continue on that path of staying on this old technology that's going to get more and more obsolete.
Oh, you mean like if you're stuck on an old platform kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So like the example that I brought up, that was a B2B distributor who they had some good direction on what they'd like to do with their website. And in 60 days, we hacked and built a whole new e-commerce platform as a skin on top of what they already had. So if you need to make short-term moves, if time to market is important, get creative and figure out how to make something delicious out of the dog food you've already got on your plate. Okay?
That's a good line, by the way. Make something delicious out of the dog food you've got on your plate. I like that. That's good.
Because you see, that's the situation, and the good thing is a lot of people are penny wise and pound foolish about their decisions. And they'll lose the market opportunity by saying, okay, well, we're not going to do anything for this website because we're going to build a new one, but the new one's going to take 18 months to go live. But we're just going to neglect the old one for that 18 months because we're putting our investment into the new one, right? That's a very common situation, and it's actually a huge missed opportunity of that 18 months of market opportunity, right? As well. You can use the existing website if you're not afraid of it and you get creative to test out the user interface designs that you want on the new website, right?
Yeah.
You take a skin on the old website that looks like the direction you want to go and see if that shoe fits, right?
Yeah.
And that gives you an opportunity in today's market rather than waiting 18 months.
Yeah. So I just want to add to that because I think that's been a common theme. This is our 17th podcast. And I think that there's been a pretty strong recommendation from all the experts that we've talked to that focusing more on incremental, like a lot of, especially in B2B, I don't know why this seems to be more of a problem in B2B, is that there's these big 18-month projects and not enough of this incremental agile methodology and mindset. And it's almost a culture shift that we think kind of needs to happen versus, oh, build me something in 18 months. Because
yeah.
By the time you even start building it and do the thing in 18 months, the market's already changed.
Well, yeah. Plus, don't forget, you gotta add your vendor selection to the overall timeline of that decision. So if it's an 18-month implementation, it's a 3 to 6 month contract negotiation, and it's another 6 months to 12 months of vendor selection. So you're looking at, if somebody doesn't, if they look at it like it's an epoch and they're only going to live within that epoch, it's really like a 2 or 3 year plus outlook from when you've decided to cut bait on the old system and you're not working with that. So now you dive into vendor selection until you're live with the new one. It's easily 2 to 3 years if you have that mentality. Right. And so I have a lot of e-commerce consulting clients that I've worked with a decade or more, and many of them I've been able to shift from that mentality to the kind of agile mentality that you're describing. And the way I coach them is to gather their requirements for what they have now, right? So that if they want to move to something else, they make sure they're not going to leave something and forget about it, right? You know, you might forget that you needed to do a certain thing because you didn't document what you were currently doing, right? Document what you're currently doing now as requirements. Document what you'd like to do in the future. Put that together into a roadmap and constantly be evaluating vendors. Don't just dive into a vendor evaluation once every 5 years when you're completely fed up with the old vendor, right?
No.
You know, because then it takes you 2 years to get off of them, right? If you're able to be constantly evaluating vendors, you can be dynamic to the opportunities, right? So one of the things that I've really enjoyed is helping my clients with software negotiations. And if you look at the right opportunities for licensing, there's timing where you can get a really good deal, right? If something is a new 1.0 version product, you may be able to get free consulting. You may be able to get big reduction in software costs, right? In the licensing costs. You may actually be able to develop a deeper partnership relationship with the software vendor so that your input has much more weight in directing the future of that software, right?
That's interesting.
So those are opportunities in vendor selection, but you can only really make the most of those opportunities if you've already done your research and you're able to be agile on that decision, right? You want to be able to time your contract decision with their greatest need. And then that gives you the biggest discount, whether it's end of year, end of quarter for just trying to get a discount, or it's tied to versions so that you can get influence in the product direction, right? Because if you're at the bigger end of the business or you're a more aggressive and agile business, you want that kind of tighter relationship with your software vendors where they're willing and excited to take your input and change the software on your behalf.
So,
right?
Yeah, I want to jump on something you said here because I just love it. I mean, I've worked as a head of e-commerce marketing or both for a bunch of different brands, and I've been on the agency side and I consult. So a lot of similar situations, and I boiled it down in a way that it's like, what's now, what's next, and what's later, right?
Yep.
Because again, it's that simplification where people get so overwhelmed, they get so caught up in the 18-month, 5-year, whatever idea, that they don't realize that they can do a lot of things now, and they really have to do a lot of things now in order to keep the business going and to increase the learning and all of the things you just pointed out. So you said it a lot better than I could, and I'm really glad that that's exactly the way that you approach it. No, that's cool. And no, you're welcome. And so let me segue to another question that's related to this. So we're talking about, e-commerce platforms, right? So, you have putting a new skin or a new face on something maybe for now, but how do you really choose something to move to? Or let's say you're starting kind of with a clean slate and you're building a business. What should you really, work with? What would be the tips from you on that?
Sure. Well, my niche has been in B2B businesses selling 100 million a year to billions a year. Sometimes down in the neighborhood of 10 to 25 million a year if it's somebody who I'm compelled with maybe the products they're selling, right? Like for a long time, I've actually had a soft spot for safety products companies, even before 2020. Because if I'm helping somebody sell $100 million a year of hard hats or of safety products, or selling $15 million a year of hard hats, that's actually saving somebody's head from getting crushed, right?
Yeah.
So I feel a little satisfaction personally from helping those companies. And so in that realm of that size of business, there's only a few platforms that are worth serious consideration, right? Like at the king of the hill, you've got Hybris, right? But like anybody who's king of the market, that comes with a kingly price, right? As well as the cost of implementation, right? The enterprise software size budget of implementation that would come with that. Insite is another platform that's doing very well in B2B and tailoring to the B2B needs. I've had some good conversations with the founder of Insite, and I like the intention behind the software. And I've got some clients who use it and are happy with that. But Magento is the horse to watch in this race, right? Because Magento has some big enough B2B clients. and the traction they have in the B2B or the B2C market is just uncomparable to anything. It's a combination of the open source nature of the software and the depth of the overall developer community. I mean, there's tens of thousands of developers all around the world who all have expertise in Magento. It's just that makes it so much more interesting, and also just lets people get farther for their dollar, right? So Magento is definitely out of the platforms one to watch. And then if you're a big enough fish, right? If you're an Amazon or you're a Granger, you're not really working on a platform. You might be plugging into it,
Yeah.
but really you're building it yourselves, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I ran a couple of projects for Amazon 20 years ago, and I know what that thing's built like, and I've kept in touch with people there, and it's a giant software company. They don't need a platform. They're a better platform than everybody else, and they've got enough people, and also more importantly, they actually have the foresight. They're actually investing in the planning and the vision to have long-term strategy, long-term roadmap, and development effort that's able to get out in front of the challenges, right? They're creating a market. In the B2B world, most people are 5 years behind, 10 years behind in the technology, right?
Yeah.
You compare it to cutting edge web experience.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I appreciate some of those answers. What I thought was interesting is the new B2B. I don't know if you guys ever look at the Gartner Wave reports. They just came out with the B2B one, and Magento was actually now considered a leader. I think they've been a leader, but they're the other leader that I thought was interesting was Salesforce. They put Salesforce as the only other leader. And they have kind of weird criteria that's subjective. Hybris has technically the strongest market presence and most GMV. Like you said, they're kind of the king in a lot of ways. But they put Salesforce high up there. I thought that was interesting. I know they've bought some stuff. Obviously, they bought Demandware. So really, when they say Salesforce, it's really kind of like the Demandware.
Yeah.
Demandware was historically more of a B2C platform. So it's kind of weird that they put them there. And I don't have a lot of personal experience with Salesforce, but it seems like they're making a pretty big push, or maybe they're obviously spending money with Gartner, and so there's something going on there. But and I have talked to sales reps at Magento who have lost deals to Salesforce on the B2B side. So it is interesting that they're making that push, and obviously they have the firepower now. Now that Demandware got bought by them to make that push. So it'll be interesting to see how that. But I would imagine it's also a pretty high price tag too.
Oh yeah, Demandware was never cheap, and Demandware was also a very closed system, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it comes down to, when it comes to vendor platform selection, right? And for vendor selection across any piece, not just platforms, the piece of advice, and I've been given lots of advice for 20 years on this, but the piece of advice, if there's one piece that's resonated and provided the most value afterwards to my clients, is in vendor selection. Don't ask, can you do this? Ask, how can you do this? Okay? You don't want a checkbox, you want the essay answer, right? You want to understand the process, because from one platform to the next, it might be all consulting services, or it might be a configuration inside of a utility, right?
Yeah.
And the same, but it's a yes or a no on the checkbox of can you do this, but the answer of how do you do this, right? What's involved, digging into that is the most important thing for vendor selection. And of course, you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, I've paid Gartner and other analysts to do reports for us, and guess what? Next thing you know, you end up in a better position in their quadrant, right? It's not like their quadrant is based on something you can actually add up and measure a score of, right? It's based on a feel of the market and based on their feel. And if you pay them to feel good, they'll feel good.
Yeah.
If Salesforce is in there, it's because of Demandware, and Demandware isn't big on the B2B, but it's not that they can't do it, right? It's actually pretty easy for a B2C company to figure out the transition into B2B. It's a little tougher for B2B to go into B2C, because you have customer expectation that's very different and much higher. and also the volume of customer interactions, right? The cost of transaction completely changes because the B2B transaction, the value of a customer, right? You know, like one of the things I did at Amazon was a lot around customer lifetime value. Well, the customer lifetime value of a B2C customer for a given website that sells XYZ, let's say, is, you know, the lifetime value is $5,000, $10,000, right? That's how much you might make out of that customer over the life of the customer on $200 to $500 transactions, right? $5,000 to $10,000, just as a ballpark. But in the same realm of kind of the distribution of your customer base, in the B2B world, on a site that I'm working with, that customer lifetime value might be in the millions, right?
Yeah.
That's customer interaction. And so it's the same amount of call center people to handle it. It's just your possibility is 10 grand versus 10 million. It's totally different math. So that's part of the growing pains that some people in the B2C world or B2B world have when they try to go direct to consumer. But the opportunity is huge. Okay, if you can make it, that's great. One of my bigger B2B clients, you know, I got them started on the path of creating microsites for direct to consumer, right? So instead of selling their whole phone book side catalog, they would set up a little website for this one little tiny page of their catalog. And it was super SEO optimized, right? So they had natural SEO. They didn't have to pay tons for the sites that do exist. It's practically free because it's done as a microsite within their existing architecture. They didn't have to set up a new platform. They didn't have to set up anything new except for a couple of new pages and some new graphic objects, right? And boom, now you have a whole new website. And now, last count, they had like 30 of them because they had so much success. And they're just, you know, raking in the cash, and they're able to achieve a slightly higher margin, right? And that higher margin and those additional transactions, that offsets the additional load for the customer interactions, right?
Yeah.
You know, the cost of servicing the customer.
I think let's circle back. I want to talk a little bit more about B2B going into B2C, but I want to touch on one more platform that we didn't mention that I think I've had my eye on for a long time, and I think that I'm hopeful that this is kind of their time to start growing and like getting more awareness. Is BigCommerce. They were in the Gartner report as like the strong leader, was below the leaders, and I think they're an interesting player because obviously they're very B2C too. They're kind of like similar to Shopify, but they have a lot more enterprise focus and potential to do B2B, and they've already got some decent B2B customers. But they've got a pretty good roadmap and vision. So I've seen what they're working on. But what I like about them is they're the only like true kind of SaaS low cost. Because part of the problem that I think that happens in B2B is some of the platforms that we're talking about, most likely they're 6-figure plus implementations, right? You know, realistically, most of the time when you're implementing Magento, Hybris, Insite, they're 6 figures. But BigCommerce is an interesting one because if they can continue to improve and get a little bit better, you know, they're a lot more cost effective with the SaaS, you know, self-updating solutions. So.
I mean, it all depends on your goals and your budget and your understanding and awareness. I mean, if you really want to be successful in e-commerce, regardless of B2B or B2C, you know, just a general ballpark is that your budget for technology and staff on that aspect of the business should be in the neighborhood of 3 to 5%, right? 3% if you want to be good, 5% if you want to be a market leader. Some people are even putting a little higher into that if you're somebody like Granger, right? But you know, it's certainly not, you know, of their entire revenue, but they put gobloads, you know, their budget. But most people are actually going in more like 0.1%, right? You know, their budget is just so low that, you know, really it's a matter of having a platform that's in the right scale for your business. And BigCommerce is great for hitting that niche of people who need something which is a little bit more budget conscious. But you know, when it comes to picking out a foundation for the future of your business, right? Because if somebody's replatforming, it's going to be at least 3 years on that platform. Hopefully you're sticking around for 5 years nowadays. It used to be people would try to get 10 years out of a platform, but without major upgrades, you're not making it 10 years anymore.
Yeah.
But if you're going for 3 to 5 years, that's an important decision, and
Yeah.
don't be penny wise and pound foolish about that decision, right?
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Okay, so again, it all comes down to, as I said, document your requirements, because you might be B2B and the guy down the street might be B2B, but the guy down the street actually has delivery trucks and you don't, right? Maybe you do everything through UPS, right? So that's a whole difference, right? Maybe you have multiple warehouses and they don't, right? So just because you're B2B doesn't mean one size fits all. So it's really important to look at all the different things, all the different kinds of integrations that you need to do, right? Because if you're on demandware, it's no fun to do integrations, right? It's probably a little more fun now that Salesforce owns them, because Salesforce has a mountain of consultants who will just glue whatever they want to whatever they want and charge you a lot for it. But but demandware is not really built for integrations, right? And on the other side you've got Magento, which is just totally open, and there's so many integrations that are already built that you can get for practically free, right? So you got to look at what your requirements are and then check off how each one stacks up against each other in meeting those requirements. That's what matters than anything. And then you look at the price, right? But you also have to look at the revenue opportunity, right? If the opportunity is that you're doing 100 million, and just by even optimizing the search within your site, you could be getting an extra 10 million bucks. Well, that means that the decision of what platform you're on doesn't really make that much difference, whether it's 100 grand or 500 grand. If your opportunity is, once you optimize it, that you could be making an extra 10 million.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Like you said, I think a lot of people focus on the dollars and the costs and not the opportunity. We had a guest, Brian Beck, who has a book called $1 Billion B2B e-commerce. And because it really is like, there's so much money in it that, being penny wise, like you said, trying to save 50 grand, you could be costing yourselves $10 million.
I worked with Brian Beck at Harbor Freight Tools. He worked at Harbor Freight Tools for a while, and I made number changes like I'm describing to you guys at Harbor Freight Tools. I can't tell you specifics.
So obviously you're one of your key expertise is search. So can you tell us a little bit about what that is like, and how, like, maybe in layman's terms, because a lot of search, I think people know what they want, but the inner workings of it is somewhat complicated. So let's say you're, like you said, I think the $100 million distributor manufacturer is always a good example, kind of that middle of the road mid-market guy. Like what would you do in their shoes if?
Well, in the end, when people call me, usually it's because they're starving. It's because they're exasperated that they have troubles with people being able to find things on their website, and they've told that problem to their buddies in the industry. And somebody in their industry said, hey, this guy saved my ass. Saved me in doing that, right? So yeah, a big part of what I do is I try to make the people who bring me into a company look like the hero. I don't try to stand up and be like, hey, look at the awesome thing that I did. I'd be like, hey, look at the awesome thing that we did together, and this guy is amazing, right? That's a big part of it. So, but the opportunity is really big. Right. And it's a matter of you choosing to do it. But in the end, people come to me because their customers are starving. They want to get a product and they can't get to the product. Right. Brian's predecessor at Harbor Freight Tools called me up one time and said, people are searching for hammers and they can't find hammers. Why? Right. And he didn't understand that somebody had set up in their system a definition saying hammers as a search points to category number 345. And then 2 years later, somebody else changed the category structure. So 345 now pointed to wrenches. So no wonder you're getting wrenches when you search for hammers, right? Because that was a bad implementation. That was somebody who didn't follow best practices. There were also people who didn't update, right? So imagine this, you're starving for product. It's like you need to eat lunch, right? So really, in the realm of what I'm doing, I think about it like I'm building you a picnic bench, right? You need to eat lunch. I'm making you a place where you can actually eat lunch. Now, the fun thing is the art of how to build a picnic bench for somebody, to understand that this is the height for the table part and this is the height for the bench part. And that's really the essence of what a picnic bench is. The materials and the tools you use, well, you can make one out of logs with a hatchet, or you could have a handsaw, or you could have a fancy wood shop, right? And in either case, you can make a picnic bench, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the important thing is to look at and understand the shopper behavior, where the shoppers are missing, where they need help, right? Understand the data and the systems that are available to help us align the shopper's intention with the data and the products, right? So then you figure out how to make that all fit. And it's really not rocket science, but there is an art to it. And there's definitely, a lot of tricks that you can learn on how to do the data analysis, right? I actually, in the back end, when I go into a client, I actually use some artificial intelligence stuff that I wrote. It's my own proprietary stuff that analyzes the traffic on your site and understands what the things that people are looking for. And it also analyzes the product data and understands how to, gives me kind of a hint as to how to align those two things together, right? Because somebody might be looking for, somebody might be looking for sprockets on your website, but really you sell gears, right? But the interest in sprockets is significant enough and you're not paying attention to that interest. In reality, you need to sell those guys some gears, right? And so that's an important part of what I see as easy value for people to achieve with search and findability, right? You need to have a search system that has an understanding of the synonyms that are in the mindset of the shopper. Sometimes actually I see huge value in implementing multilingual systems for people, right? If your business is based in Southern California, you need to make a website that can handle Spanish, but you need to have some understanding of how the local Spanish-speaking people are going to use e-commerce, right? When I work with people in French Canada selling plumbing parts, there's some word in French for gasket, but nobody uses it. They just use gasket, right? Like the plumbers call it a gasket, even though there's some French word for it. They just use the English word. And so there's this nuance in how to deal with understanding the actual shopper intention, right? And if you study the data, the things that matter, the things that will actually move the needle on the business, they actually pop off the screen using the algorithms that I've got.
Yeah, I mean, the shopper intention piece is something that I personally have been so connected to as well for years. And you're really bringing me back and making me nostalgic. I've actually had Harbor Freight and Bass Pro as clients, but they were clients of mine in the transition from the catalog to the e-commerce era, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the discussions back at that time, I think I was working on a site with Harbor Freight probably back in 2000 or 1999. I mean, really that far back. The question was, well, gee, in our catalogs, we have these stories and we engage people in this, section that we have color tabbed, right, that they flip to because they know how to use the products here. So how do we categorize the products, for the new world of the internet, right? It's fascinating because the topic really hasn't changed, right? It's still like, what is the customer intention? How are we supposed to communicate? What are the terms that people are using? And, in B2C, it's always stuff too, like in fashion or health and wellness or whatever. Like, do you call it khakis or chinos or work pants or poplin or, on and on and on and on. And people all call it different things, even if there's a reality to what it is. People call it different things. So great stuff. I really, really love it. I mean, I would, unless Isaiah has another follow-up, I was going to just ask, the next question and see. Yeah,
no, because I want to make sure we get to some of your favorite topics, Tim.
I have a couple favorites I bring up almost every episode. I like boiling things down for our listeners and into, very simple, if possible, sort of stories of success or failure. That's something that's always a hot topic, for me in my conversations with people. It's like, well, tell us something that works, or tell us, something that we absolutely shouldn't be doing because it leads to failure. So, enter that from any angle you wish. But I love hearing about successes and failures for B2B, that we could share.
Sure. Well, success and failure modes are fantastic in contrast, right? Because oftentimes the cause of a failure is integrally related to the remedy of the failure, which is also related to the steps that bring about actual success, right?
Yep.
They're often really well tied together. So, for example, one of the biggest failure modes that we've already touched on is budget, right? Penny wise, pound foolish, right? You'll get somebody who buys a really expensive platform and has a really expensive initial implementation, and then has no budget for the upkeep. Right?
Yes, we've heard that one.
Like, give yourself a budget for the upkeep and a plan for the upkeep and a roadmap, like we were discussing. Well, that's a way to get to success. Give yourself no budget and no plan. That's a way to get to a failure, right? So they're really fun for contrast, right? I mean, if you've got no budget for e-commerce and you've got no success, well, you've got no surprise, right? Like, it can't be surprised. Another area that's both opportunity and opportunity for failure is some people will have huge search engine marketing spend, but no effort put into search engine optimization. So paying for those click-through ads, and some people will just give a budget to an outsourced consulting agency and they'll blow the money. They'll be happy to spend the money.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll get a return on investment or not, right?
Yeah.
But if you're not spending anything at all to further develop and optimize and improve your site from a natural organic search engine optimizations perspective, well, that's really quite foolish, because it's totally been proven, everybody who's ever studied it, is that dollar for dollar, you get a lot more value out of natural organic SEO improvements than just off of search engine marketing spend, right?
Yeah.
If you spend $100,000 on your SEO improvements, that improves your site for forever going forward. And it actually, if you do it right, it actually compounds exponentially the improvement, right? Because you've done things that improve your site authenticity score, etc., right? So they grow over time just by them like maturing, like interest, right? Your search engine optimization improvements. Whereas your SEM marketing spend is pouring money down the drain, because as soon as it's gone, it's gone. Right, granted, you might have a filter and you catch some of that money into revenue, and you can measure it and get an ROI. It's totally, especially if you're smart about it, right? But that's another big success and failure, is just not spending any money in search engine optimization.
Yeah, I want to add to that, because we haven't really talked a lot about SEO on this podcast, and I've got a pretty big SEO background, and I think it's a missed opportunity in B2B. Because the advantage that B2B has is that they also have typically larger catalogs. So they have tens or hundreds or thousands, maybe even millions of products. And if they're smart with that product data, so it's like you're solving two problems with one. If you do really good product data, you'll probably have better SEO, and you're just going to naturally get more traffic and business. And I think that's a huge missed opportunity in the industry, or they look at it as like, oh, I got to only do product data, so it's my product data budget. But if you look at it as like, well, it's your SEO budget and your product data budget, maybe you can double that budget and do double as good of a job,
Well, yeah, a big part of it is looking at it from an overall strategy perspective, from somebody like Tim who understands like the big picture, right? And that your product data, if it's incorporated correctly into your site design, it feeds the SEO tags intentionally and not incidentally, right? Most people, they just load up a product description and they say, well, okay, cool, there's a field for the short description, so let's just yank out the first sentence, put that in the short description. Oh, there's some other SEO field on the site, well, let's just yank part of the short description and stuff it up into there as a format and be done with it, right? Without any intention behind what's going to go in those eventual SEO fields. If instead you have those SEO fields in the product data record and you'd be like, hey, this is what I want to put in that SEO field, you can do it with a lot more intention, right?
Yeah.
And there's room for generating that content intelligently, especially using artificial intelligence or other smart algorithms. Because I have clients with 5 million products. You're not gonna build out a new website with some new SEO and just go through each one by hand and do an awesome job, right?
No, yeah.
You've got to come up with some sense of a structure and how to do it automatically. Via an algorithm. But it's totally possible, but you have to, put some thought into the intention behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think related to this, at least in my mind and connected to this is really how people treat B2C versus B2B. But I think you laid out one of the challenges there. Most B2C companies, aside from like marketplaces and stuff, don't have 5 million products, right? They don't have that many SKUs. So, when you're thinking of what is great about B2C versus what is needed in B2B, is there still a flow that can happen, and what should be coming from B2C to B2B, right? It really, what do you think are the hot things that people are missing in B2B that are good in B2C?
Well, do you mean as far as like features of his websites?
Yeah, I mean, like what can B2B learn from B2C is probably the simplest way, the biggest like overarching way to put it. Or is that really even a good way to look at things?
Well, sure, it's a great. What can B2B learn from B2C? Everything. Because after all, as I said before, B2B in general is about 5 to 10 years behind B2C in terms of understanding the shopper experience. Yeah. So social, right? All sorts of social aspects, Web 2.0 content aspects, understanding site stickiness and the value of that. A few B2B sites get that, and they do a great job, because the ultimate goal of a B2B site is to have somebody keep your website up on their sales counter all day long, and when a customer comes in and tries to buy something, they're getting it from your B2B site, right? That's the ultimate goal. So building in site stickiness is something that I've helped a lot of people with, and that's more of a B2C understanding concept, right? So what can B2B learn from B2C? Everything. Just keep your eye out for what's hot, right? What websites are actually doing well in the B2C world as far as trending goes, because the traffic numbers are very transparent. There's enough web monitoring sites out there that can tell you who's hot and who's a new upcomer without it even being in the press, right? Yeah. So just keep an eye out for who's doing cool stuff, because there's so much opportunity out there, right? Mm-hmm. It's technology, right? The B2B folks are still significantly doing a lot of stuff by hand, right? There's still a lot of hand work, and so much of that could be automated with supply chain optimization stuff and automation in your shipping division, right? How the transaction goes from the website to actually being in a box and getting on a truck, getting out of the door. There's still a lot more people involved in the B2B world compared to the progressive B2C folks. And so that's just not being smart, it's okay to be strong like a bull, but you should also be smart like a tractor.
I like that. Good line. Sorry. See, again, we got to pull all of our good lines from you.
Yeah, we got to get some quotes out of there.
Good.
So
smart like a bull, smart like a tractor. I like that. This is good.
I want to.
Bull, smart like tractor. Yeah, you got it.
One of the topics that I like to ask is what are the differences between B2B and B2C? And I think we've covered a lot of that in our podcast. So I'd like to kind of turn that around. And as a B2B company, kind of adding to the B2C thing, where do you think, I think there's an opportunity, like you said, for B2B to do B2C, building microsites, like what do you, and everyone's different, it depends on where you're at, but let's just, generalize a little bit here. Like, where do you see opportunities for B2B to get into B2C, and why should they do it, and when should they do it?
Well, it's a perfect question. I mean, I've been invited to talk about that for a decade. So, and have helped a lot of people succeed, and have seen, when I get invited in to have a consulting session, the first thing I do is talk about what they've already done, what's been successful and what's failed. So that means I've had a decade of listening to big companies and learning what they've done wrong. Yeah. Okay. So it helps me to guide other people to not do it wrong, right? You know, over the years, there's plenty of things I've heard that didn't work out, and I've learned why it didn't work out. And then I'll go into the next section, and, you know, the next client will say, well, here's what we've been thinking about doing. I'd be like, well, just so you know, this is how it's failed for somebody else before, right? Or this, and these are the lessons that they've learned. So there's just so many opportunities out there, and you just need to think about them and plan for them, right? There's lots of ways that you can do it wrong. There's lots of ways that you can do it right. But the most important way to do it wrong, the easiest way to do it wrong, is to rush into doing it wrong, right? So give yourself some time and some breathing room for strategic planning. That's a very important message and lesson for people to get across. You know, in B2C, is a little different. And so if you're a B2C customer, or if you're a B2C site, and now you want to start reaching the B2B market, right? Going in that direction, it's pretty hard to screw up, because your vendor relationships are not usually restricted, right? Your shoppers are not going to be offended by you reaching into a bigger market, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a whole bunch of things that you don't have to be so worried about if you're a B2C business and you're trying to scale up by reaching to those higher average order value clients, right?
Yep.
Instead of the individual shopper who might buy enough stuff for their home office, you want the business that's buying enough stuff for 100 offices, right?
Yep.
To go the other direction, to go B2B into the B2C market, you got to be concerned with vendor territoriality, right? You might not be allowed to sell product X into territory Y. You may actually have that restriction, right? Although that's something that's important to watch out for trends, because we're getting more direct to consumer from the manufacturer, especially. They're just going to cut out all the distributors eventually. And you know, there'll be certain manufacturers that just don't do distributor relationships and only go direct to consumer, because now they have the technology that enables them to do that, and they get to fully manage the customer relationship.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They get to completely manage it. They no longer have to have a middleman. And the purpose of having territoriality is so that they can have consistency with that customer expectation, right? The people who are most defensive of their territoriality are usually the best brands with the best reputations to lose. That's why they're so defensive, because they get to control that and manage it that way. So that's something to consider, because you have vendor management. You also have customers, right? If you're in the B2B world and you're selling to the guy who's then selling retail, if you start selling direct retail, well, the person in between who used to be your best customer, he may be unhappy with that, right?
Yeah. I see that as a common problem. Just to add to that, and I've seen this before, do you think that you should potentially create a separate brand, but then you're kind of being, you know, a little misleading? And sometimes I've seen companies kind of hide these separate brands so people don't even know that they're owned. I mean, I think that's a tricky one. Like, what would you?
Well, I mean, it's funny, because, like, you know, the other half of my life was I actually grew up in a B2B business, right? My grandfather had a wholesale plumbing and heating business. He also had a retail plumbing and heating business and a real estate development business. Mm-hmm. So when the retail plumbing shop was selling oil tanks for less than anybody else in town could buy them, you know, my grandpa would giggle that the guy's calling up the manufacturer saying, how come Abe can sell this for less than I can buy it for? And the manufacturer could respond and be like, well, I have no idea. I don't sell to Abe. But I do sell to the company with the next number down in the business, right? The next number down address. Well, that's the same building. And, you know, that's the wholesale distributor with a big warehouse in the back. And, you know, I do sell to them. And guess what? They're actually really careful about buying exactly how many water heaters, oil tanks, whatever, fit on a tractor trailer. They know exactly how many are going to fit, so they don't have to pay for minimum shipping, and they do the math, and they order the same amount. When we have the discount deal is when they place the order, and they have a giant warehouse, and they rotate their stock, and they only have to order once a year because they have a big warehouse full of rotating stock, right? You know, that way you get the third column price, you know. So there's opportunities there, right? But you have to be smart about it. And you have to, you know, name it differently so that you don't upset people, right? So that's the one consideration, is picking a different name so that you don't upset or disrupt your existing market. So, for example, Grainger goes direct to consumer under Zoro.com, right? Mm. It's Grainger.
Yeah.
Now Zoro.com got much better prices than Grainger. And a tip, go ahead and order something small from them first, because then they'll send you a 20% discount before you buy the $4,000 worth of stuff you really need, right?
Wow.
You know, because they're really good at giving discounts on top of already having super competitive web pricing. But they're not eroding their existing Grainger market by saying, hey, come here and buy the stuff for 20% less, you know, without the coupon, right?
Yeah.
You know, so they went under a different brand, and that's pretty common, especially when you go on microsites. By definition, you're going to go with different brands because you really want brands that are targeted to the SEO community of the microsite. You know, some people try to make it hidden. Other people just accept that it's a different business, just happens to be owned by the same parent.
Yeah.
So you're not trying to be shady. It's just a different business, happens to be owned by the same parent, and they're aligned. That's okay, right? You know, so like if you think you're doing something wrong and you're trying to do something that makes it look like you're not doing something wrong, actually, it kind of makes it look like you're doing something wrong, right? You know, you're kind of trying to make it look different. Whereas if you just accept that, oh, it's a different business, it just happens to be operated in the same office and is owned by the same people, but it's a different business, it's a different website. If you just accept that that's it, then it reduces the perceived ethical challenges, right? Because it is a different business. It's a different, you just accept it and you operate it as that, right? You know, if you keep a separate set of books, etc., you know, it's a lot easier. Now, the one caveat to that strategy is that if there's an opportunity or value in leveraging the existing brand. So if your existing B2B brand has got enough brand awareness that it's going to add value to your B2C experience, then there's big value there, right? If there's an opportunity for the B2C experience to add value to your existing brand, well, that's another opportunity to consider.
And then you can make it one of the same and just make it a layer on top of your existing, you know, buy list price or whatever. You could just, you know, on the existing website. Yeah.
Exactly. Some people just open up their existing B2B website to B2C traffic with guest logins and different pricing. And when you log in, you get your actual B2B pricing. You know, that's an easy way to go, right?
I think that's happening more and more now. You know,
that is happening more and more to go. It's, again, as I said, it's the easy way to go, right?
Yeah.
But it has the opportunity, as I said, to alienate your existing customer base, especially if the pricing discount difference isn't all that much. And then it makes it so, for example, if you're selling, you know, plumbing parts, and then you know, you realize that the company you're buying, you know, I'm a local plumbing retail spot. The people I'm buying the stuff from are now selling directly to retail, right? But they're selling to retail at web competitive retail prices that I can't compete with. So that person who used to sell to me, well, or does sell to me, they are now undercutting me. It feels like that. And so that can alienate the relationship. So that's the downside, right?
Yeah.
But let's say you're trying to build up your business to make it go public. Well, then go B2C under your own name, because you really just want to funnel as much revenue and as much brand awareness through your brand name as possible, because the upside of a stock IPO is a whole different kind of revenue. It's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, you can alienate a couple of customers to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if we're gonna go take in a couple $100 million in stock investment gain, then we'll stick our head out and dance all sparkly and make everybody know we're there, because that's how that game is played, right?
Yeah.
You know. But if you're a 100-year-old B2B business and you're trying to make sure you stay afloat in the emergence of marketplaces and other disruptions, well, you need to not stick your head out too much and make sure that you take really good care of your existing customer base and figure out how to grow that customer base, right? You know, look at a little bit more organic, because you've got an existing business that you've got to risk alienating, right? You know, if you're already doing $1 billion worth of business or $100 million worth of business using an old traditional model and have a crappy old B2B website that's doing 5 or 10% of your business, but you know you need to figure it out, Well, you got to do that figuring out in a gentle way so you don't disrupt the existing market.
Yeah, that's great advice. So, I want to wrap up here, conscious of everyone's time. I like to end with kind of a forecast. Like, what do you see as kind of the opportunity and challenges of the coming decade in B2B? Like you said, we're 5-10 years behind in a lot of ways. Do you see that catching up like faster? Do you see that kind of converging to be more one-on-one in this coming decade, or how would you describe that?
Well, I've been a futurist for a long time, and so there's the near term and the long term, right? The near term, 2020 has presented some unique challenges and also unique opportunities, right? As I said, before 2020 came along, I had a lot of clients that were deep in the safety products business. So their business is certainly booming right now. Right? My
Yeah.
clients in the cleaning, packaging, janitory, sanitary areas, their business is booming. So there's opportunity that you need to take advantage of, right? But there's challenges. So for example, the supply chain challenges, right? Like I said, I've been helping people figure out how to get availability filters on their website, because that can frustrate the shopper, right? If the shopper clicks into 10 items and keeps finding out that they're back ordered, they stop clicking on your website, they go to somebody else's website that has the availability filter, and then they don't get frustrated, right? It's much more efficient for the shopper's reality. So that's the immediate challenge and opportunity. Kind of a longer term, kind of looking out at the decade ahead, what we're going to see more is those geographic locations. The regionality of B2B distribution is going to start to melt away, because a lot of it's entrenched with the vendor relations. So it's the manufacturer saying you're only allowed to sell east of the Mississippi, right? But once you have a website and 90% of your business is through the website, it's a little harder to regulate that the people are only buying east of the Mississippi, right? Once you start opening up B2C, well, you're not going to regulate that anymore, and then those restrictions are just going to slowly melt away. And then you're going to also see more of the convergence of the manufacturers, as I said, going direct into the consumer market. That's a big part of the next decade that B2B distributors have to be aware of. And so some of the bigger distributors are aligning themselves with the manufacturers as partners in that endeavor, so that they are actually, like, the bigger distributors are intentionally aligning themselves with the manufacturers to provide that effective direct-to-consumer experience from the manufacturer's website, right? But really the fulfillment and handling of the customers is still happening through the distributor, right?
Yeah.
Some of them are getting ahead of that a little bit, but in a way, everybody's just kind of digging their own grave, because it's the concept of the manufacturer going direct to the consumer is where I think we're going to be in 10 years. So it's super important to be making whatever revenue you can now, so you can weather the storm with a big war chest, right?
Yeah.
A lot of my clients, they're family-owned businesses. They've been around for decades or even a century. And so, the family has a giant bucket of money sitting in the bank, and they can make platform decisions that are not penny wise, pound foolish. And now is the time to do that.
Yeah.
Right? Now is the time to make those decisions, to build the business so that you're somebody who can't just get brushed aside later.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that's a really important point. That's the summary of this episode. Maybe we should title it "Don't Be Penny Wise and to Be Pound Foolish,"
Exactly.
because I think that's a common theme that keeps coming up. Well, yeah, no, I really appreciate all your insight. This was awesome. We will definitely have to have you come back and update us. We'll definitely have people come back as this progresses, and give us more insight onto what they're up to. So, yeah, any last words from anyone before we part ways?
I just want to thank Ben. I think this has been great. This has been a wonderful ride, and really appreciate all your insight. And I think our listeners are going to enjoy it.
Absolutely. I know I learned quite a bit. So once again, don't be penny wise, be bound foolish. So thanks for joining, and hope everyone learned something.
Thank you.
Happily helpful.